if I'm asking God and it's completely selfish, it would be outside of God's nature and character of holiness to actually do what I asked, because all we would be doing is promoting sin. It's only until I start having the heart that will say, you know what, God, may your will be done. Just as Jesus prayed in the garden right before he went to the cross. He said, may your will be done. And that's the kind of heart that we need to have. And so, are we having a heart that is willing to think of what God desires? When we ask, are we having the right motives? Are we asking just so that we can have freedom financially, so we can buy more things of what we want? Do we do it so that we don't have to experience pain, so we don't feel guilty for how we treat others? I mean, there's a lot of different things. But motives do matter. And all the time that I'm thinking, you know what? It's not so much that God is not answering my prayers. It's, first of all, I'm not praying at all. But the second thing is, I don't pray and I believe that God will actually give me what I'm asking for. And third, I'm praying selfishly. And it's dishonoring to God to pray selfishly and ask Him to bless them. But I thought about that and I thought, you know what? The person who gets in the way of my spiritual walk with God and the one who gets in the way of my seeking wisdom and actually changing my life is actually myself. I'll be the first one to admit that. And that takes a lot of humility to admit. But when you finally have the wisdom to admit that, that's when life is going to start changing. And when you start understanding who God is and how God cares for you and God's heart and His priorities, that's when life will change. You know what? The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's knowing that there is a God, knowing His nature and character, and fearing Him so much because He has all authority, all power, all strength, all godliness, that you tremble even before Him and say, you know what? You are the God of the universe, and I want to live holy as you are holy, and I want to change my life. It's that kind of life. It's that kind of realization that leads you to living His life. Not saying, God, I'm God, and you selfishly meet my needs. You see, I looked at my life and I see, you know what? A lot of my prayers have not been answered in the way that I have asked. And the reason for that is because, one, I didn't believe, and second, because I was selfish. And as I look back on my life, I actually thank God for not answering some of the prayers I have asked. Because in hindsight, they would have been destructive for me spiritually and hurtful to people I know. And some things, I just don't understand why God had things turn out the way they did. But I know that God is a good God, and that He loves me. And so I just have to trust in His nature, and His character, and His providence. But one of the things that I want us to teach you about today is don't get in the way of helping you grow spiritually. Don't get in your own way of not helping yourself live wisely. One of the great lessons that I learned is there's a man who had a demon-possessed boy. And I can relate very much to this man. And because he doubted. He doubted who Jesus' character of compassion. He doubted God's power. And he was part of the reason why his son wasn't healed. And I think about that. Part of the reason why I don't receive healings, part of the reason why my life continues in destructive ways at times, is because of my lack of faith in God. So it's not that God is necessarily rejecting my prayers, it's because of my lack of faith. And that takes a whole nother step of humility, to have the kind of humility to admit, saying, you know what, maybe it's me. Have you ever known that when you get into a relationship struggle, sometimes it's easy to blame the other person, but then times you take a time out and you stop and you look at yourself and say, well, maybe it's me. Maybe it's my thinking. Maybe it's my attitude. Maybe it's my character. And you know what? If God is perfect, then maybe it is me. If God loves me, maybe it is me. If God made me a whole bunch of promises that are at my disposal, maybe it is me. And you know what? It's that kind of realization and attitude that really frees you. Instead of anger and hatred and blame towards God, we take some accountability and then we give up full control to God, and God says, let me take care of it for you. You see, let me read you about a man who had a demon-possessed man, because we're going to learn the way that we should ask God. In Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verse 14 through 29, it has this account. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit and has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth and he gnashes his teeth and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. O unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him, and when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for him who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of the boy, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse, and many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? He replied, this kind can only come out by prayer. You know, one of the amazing things that I think about is I'm like that father. You know what? Sometimes I have all these different problems and I come before God in prayer, and you know what? And I lift up all these prayers and I say, God, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm burnt out, I'm struggling, I'm hurting, I'm broken, and if you can, do this for me. Or a lot of times we'll pray, if it be your will, but in reality what we're saying is, if you can. But do you really think about that? What was Jesus' response to that guy? It was, if you can. I'm only the Son of God. If you can? I mean, think about that. We're talking to the God of the universe. He spoke creation into existence. He's the one who rose Jesus from the dead. He's the one who has victory. If you can? I mean, that's a powerful thing that even Jesus rebuked him like that. But do you see what Jesus said? He said, everything is possible for him who believes. You see, it's really about, do you have the faith in the Son of God? And the if you can shouldn't really exist. He said, show me pity and help us. God has made known he has the greatest heart of compassion, that he demonstrated his love for you, that he sent Jesus to die in your stead on the cross. Is he willing to help you? He's willing to help you so much that Jesus was willing to give up the glory of heaven. If you can, God is the God of the universe, and he can heal and change anything if you're willing to believe. He said anything is possible if you believe. If you know who God is, if you trust in God, if you're willing to submit and be humble and give him control.